Okay, let's talk about NPCs. Hey everybody, Matt Colville here. I set up an Idea Informer page, which there's a link to in the doobly-doo, so that folks who wanted to could let me know what kinds of videos they wanted to see. And you get to vote on different people's ideas, and the ones with the most votes rise to the top. And the number one video people wanted to see was on NPCs. But I'm not 100% sure how to boil down everything I know about how to run NPCs into one video. So this may be the kind of thing where there's a whole bunch of questions in the comments, and there'll be another video. Maybe this isn't the NPC video, maybe this is just a NPC video, and there'll be another one later where I answer people's questions. I started by going on a Twitch and saying, all right, folks, what is there about running an NPC that you feel like you need help with? I got a lot of answers, but by far the number one answer, the most common answer, was people who were looking for advice on how to make their NPCs memorable. And I was like, okay, memorable. Now I was somewhat suspicious of that, and you'll see why. So I think the next day I said, name a memorable NPC. Again, I got a lot of answers, but probably around 80 to 90% of them were examples from Critical Role. Specifically, 2 characters. So a whole bunch of people named 2 specific characters from Critical Role. So if you're not familiar with Matt Mercer's D&D game that is on Twitch every Thursday night, I'll put a link in the doobly-doo. I sort of presume everyone who watches this is, but I am occasionally reminded that there are some few people out there who got to this channel via other means. One of the 2 NPCs that was brought up often was Gilmore, and I thought, okay, I think I understand. I know who Gilmore is. I think I understand what makes that character memorable. We'll talk about that in a second. But the next character that people referenced, the next NPC people talked about as being memorable, was a character I had not heard of before because I don't watch every episode of Critical Role. It's like 4 hours a week. Holy crap. And that was Victor, the Black Powder Merchant. I didn't watch the episodes he was in, or I didn't watch that part. I watched about 45 minutes to an hour and a half of most episodes of Critical Role. And it's astonishing how much time I spend in my week watching that show, but how little of that show I have seen. I felt like I understood what made Gilmore a memorable NPC, but I didn't know who Victor was. So I went and looked him up. I thought, who is this Victor guy and what makes him memorable?
Yes! Oh. You said you need black powder! Yes, coming! And he runs back into the hovel.
Okay, yeah, I get it. Obviously, it's clear what makes that NPC memorable. In both instances, Gilmore and Victor, the Black Powder Merchant, Matt made these NPCs memorable by giving them crazy voices or making them really overtly flamboyant characters. I mean, Gilmore is a very flamboyant character. He's described in the Critical Role wiki as having a Broadway personality, which is a euphemism I had not encountered before. But it worked. I mean, I knew what they meant as soon as they said it. Gilmore speaks flamboyantly, he dresses flamboyantly, he comes on to Vax. I think people, when they see folks like the players and Matt on Critical Role, they think that there must be some trick, there must be some way, like a checkbox they could check off, and if they do this, if they follow these instructions, then they will have a memorable character or a memorable NPC. But really, I think the trick for doing outrageous personalities, which is what makes Gilmore and Victor the Black Powder Merchant memorable, or doing great accents, is just being, there's no trick to it. You just have to be willing to look like an idiot. Not only do you have to be willing to look like an idiot, you have to be willing to look like an idiot a lot, because eventually you won't look like those guys, the folks on Critical Role, do not look like idiots. They look like pros. They literally are pros. They were not born that way. They had to work at that, often for years. And in fact, I think most of them would say they're always working at it. It's never a solved problem. I saw a video of someone, this was incredibly flattering and also just really inspiring for me as a YouTube creator, someone online who was doing my Dragonborn accent. Whenever I play a Dragonborn, either as a player or in my campaign as a DM, I look at those guys' skull and the shape of their heads, and I'm like, there is no way these folks would talk like normal people. They would have trouble forming words, right? They don't really have lips. They have like forked tongues and stuff. So I always play them with these crazy accents. And whether or not my players like it, it is memorable. Somebody said it sounded like Bill Nighy's character, Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean. That's fine, that works for me. But you notice that wasn't really an accent, that was more of a mannerism. I just did this crazy thing with my voice and called it good. And I think it was flamboyant enough that it made it somewhat easy to copy. So if you're looking for a trick as to how to make an NPC memorable, unfortunately there really isn't one other than just going for it. And you just have to go for it. Some of your friends are gonna laugh, some of them are gonna think that it's ridiculous, it might turn some of them off, but that's because you're completely new at this. Years from now, after you've been doing this for a while, you'll be super confident and your friends will be really impressed. If you want to make an outrageous character, if you want to make an NPC that your players are going to remember and you want to go for an accent or something like that, look, I'm not a dialogue coach, but I can tell you a couple of tricks that I've learned over the years. First of all, performing an NPC in a memorable way does not rely on an accent. You heard my Dragonborn voice. Is that an accent? I don't think so. I think it's just a crazy way of talking. Maybe, what's the difference between that and an accent? I don't know. But I often give NPCs tics or ways of speaking, like phrases they deploy. or I'll change my voice up. I'll go into a higher or a lower register, or there'll be some words I avoid using, like data doesn't use contractions, for instance. And I think he screwed that up a couple times, but that you get the point. I'm the lead writer at Turtle Rock Studios. I wrote 98% of the dialogue for Evolve. And when I'm writing a character like Abe, who Matt Mercer played, when I'm writing a character like Abe or Hyde, these are characters that deploy a lot of profanity. That's just their natural language. But when I write a character like Cabot, that dude never swears. Cabot doesn't swear for the same reasons that Abe and Hyde do. It's how he was raised, but it also says a lot about him as a person, as a leader. So the choices you make in the words you deploy, whether or not you swear, has a huge impact on how your players are going to perceive the character. So it's not all about accents and funny voices. I really want to break the back of that idea. Because again, if you watch Critical Role, you're going to think, playing D&D means doing accents. It means getting into character. No, that's one way to do it, and it's a lot of fun. I am typically the most actorly, the most theatrical character at any given table I'm at. So obviously I like doing that stuff, but the people I like playing with the most, the best DMs I've ever played with, one of my all-time favorite DMs never did any voices. He never role-played in character. He would always describe what the NPCs were doing in third person. That is perfectly legitimate. I am giving you permission to you can be a perfectly good DM and your players will love playing with you, and you never speak in character once. You just describe what the NPCs are doing or what they're saying in an otherwise neutral way. You can say the NPC gets angry, but that doesn't mean you have to shout. So consider, if you're going to role play the character, if you're going to try and get in character, it doesn't have to be about accents. We'll talk about accents in a second, but I don't want that to be the overwhelming, Gilmore doesn't really have an accent. He has a flamboyant Broadway personality, but is that an accent? I still love Broadway personality. It's aces. One of the things I do as a writer, and I also do this as a DM, but I learned this stuff I cut my teeth on this as a writer, and I did it in text for years. And that eventually I was able to do it in my normal speech, is I deploy Latin or Anglo-Saxon, Old English words or Latin words, depending on whether or not this is an intelligent, well-read character or not. Intelligent, well-read characters often use, in the real world, use Latinate world. They'll say planet, whereas somebody who's a down-to-earth, salt-of-the-earth, uneducated person would say world. That has a big impact on how my NPCs are perceived. The players can tell this guy's smart based on not what he says, but how he says it. When they meet a farmer, when they meet a peasant, that peasant might say the same things that an educated, the wizard from the tower might say, but he'll say it in a completely different way. He'll choose different words to use. Now, that is advice. I don't know if it's good advice because it's super esoteric and it's the kind of thing you really have to work at for years. But the good thing about running Dungeons and Dragons and basically having D&D as a hobby is that the stuff that you start trying now is going to pay off for years. I have no problem. I was talking to my friends at work. I bought a brand new big, huge tool chest to store all my stuff in, and more than one person commented on how expensive this thing was. And I was like, look, this thing, I'm going to be using this in many cases every week for the rest of my life. So don't be afraid to try accents. So let's talk about accents. Don't be afraid to try accents. Don't be afraid to try stuff like choosing different words in your speech, because even though you're going to suck at it now, eventually you will be pretty good at it. All right, so accents. Look, the best way I think to learn accents is to have a really long drive. So if you live close to work or school, move. Because if you've got about a half an hour long drive, and I think more than that will be taxing on the head meats. If you've got about a half an hour long drive, you can listen to audiobooks and you can listen to NPR. NPR is a great source. I mean, I listen to NPR because I like to know what's going on. But I listen to NPR, and often they are interviewing people from other countries or other parts of America, and you get to hear all these great accents, and I'm alone in the car driving along, and I will parrot the accent back. And not only the tone of their voice and where they put the accents and stuff like that, but also stuff like word choice. Again, word choice is huge. So have a half-hour-long drive, listen to NPR, practice the accents, and don't just listen and don't just parrot back the inflections in their voice, but also notice the words they choose. I'm actually kind of opposed. As far as this is a philosophical issue, but I always find it weird when people are playing Dungeons and Dragons and they start putting on English accents. Unless you're playing a Robin Hood game or a King Arthur game or my friend Jim's game, which was set in Albion, which was fantastic. Unless you're playing a game set in England, why does your character have an English accent? One of the brilliant casting choices of all time, I think, in my personal opinion, is casting Richard Boone as Smaug. But there's a lot of crazy accents in the Rankin Bass Hobbit. And it's funny that looking back, I remember thinking that Hobbit movie, the animated Hobbit, was kind of cheesy. But compared to the train wreck that was Peter Jackson's version, wow, the animated Hobbit is grown in my estimation. But Richard Boone's Smaug is amazing. Listen to the way this dude talks.
Well, thief, I smell you, feel your air. I hear your breath. Come along. Help yourself, there's plenty and to spare.
Right, that dude is not, that's the way that guy talks. He's not putting on an accent. He's just Richard Boone. He's in fact, he was famous before, I mean, he's not famous for being Smog, but he was famous or well known for often being the bad guy in Westerns. He's just doing his normal voice. That's just how he talks, but it's super memorable. So I'm a huge critic of that fake British accent. That's why a lot of characters in my novels speak like modern humans, because that's how it would have felt if you were in a medieval era. If you were born and raised in the 1130s, the people around you spoke, from your point of view, contemporary English, and we speak contemporary English, so don't feel pressured to do a British accent. It's kind of ridiculous. Feel free to speak in your normal voice. Feel free to affect other American accents. Here's one secret. When you first do something crazy, when you first do a flamboyant character, at first, your player's first impression is going to be, that's crazy, what is our DM doing? But only after 30 seconds, 45 seconds, a minute, it will stop being this crazy thing you're doing, and it will just become who this character is. You just gotta stick to your guns. Another thing that's great about having a half-hour long drive is listening to audiobooks. I listen to a lot of the Terry Pratchett books read by Stephen Briggs. If you can find those, I strongly recommend reading them. A, because Terry Pratchett is a genius, and B, because Stephen Briggs, I mean, there are so many characters in Terry Pratchett novels. I really do not envy the narrator of them, because he's got to find a way to make all of these characters, this huge cast, all sound distinct. So he gives all these different characters different accents in order to differentiate them, and I'll be driving along in my car and I'll just be parroting back Stephen Briggs's versions of these accents. One of the things I love about Stephen Briggs's choices as a narrator is that he makes all the dwarves Welsh. At least I think it's a Welsh accent. What do I know? So that's the first. I always try to make sure that the first and best advice is up front. I think people, when they watch Critical Role, they are inspired by the NPCs Matt creates, and they want to know, how does he do it? And the most memorable characters he has created are not, Gilmore is a pretty sophisticated dude, but the first impression he gives is very strong, and that's because Matt has made these characters deliberately outrageous, flamboyant characters, and there's no trick to that. You just have to be willing to look like a jackass for a little while. Matt does not look like a jackass when he does it, because he's been doing this for decades. Well, not decades, I don't know. A long time, you get the point. But this is now, I think, where we get to the meat of this video, and that is, I question the desire to make memorable NPCs. I question it. I'm not saying it's a bad idea. I'm just saying, think about what you're asking. Why should NPCs be memorable? What is the purpose of NPCs? I, as a DM, I do not sit around thinking, how am I going to make this NPC memorable? That is honestly something I have really never worried about. I worry about how to make bad guys memorable. We did a whole video on that. But when I'm making NPCs for the characters to meet, really my goal is to make them plausible. It's to give the players opportunities to see how they are perceived by the world around them, and give them characters to react to and interact with. It's that moment where other characters treat the players like a hero that makes them feel heroic. So my NPCs are typically there to either show the players how they are perceived in a positive or negative light. When my players start off at first level, the people that they meet are often suspicious of them because they are itinerant adventurers and trouble follows them. The townsfolk are typically happy being townsfolk, and it's only once these adventurers show up that all of a sudden there are problems with goblins and stuff like that. Later on, once they've saved the town, the people are grateful to them, and seeing that's in both instances, the goal of the NPC is to show the players how they are perceived, first with suspicion, but then later with gratitude. And that transition from suspicion to gratitude is really rewarding. I've seen it pay off with dozens of players. They love that feeling of having once been treated badly by these NPCs, or at least with suspicion, sometimes with open contempt because of the reputation that adventurers have. They love that feeling of having saved the blacksmith daughter and coming back, and now these people are super grateful to them. That is a very rewarding experience. Is it memorable? Does it make the NPCs memorable? I don't think so. They remember that experience though. They remember that feeling, and it makes them feel like heroes. So my goal with NPCs is to kind of show the players either how they are perceived or how different elements of the world are perceived. Often my players will read something I've written in some background for my campaign, and they don't know exactly how it works. They can't imagine it, but once they meet the NPCs, then they start understanding how this stuff works. Like, for instance, they read the one sheet I hand out and they think the Invincible Overlord must be some tyrannical, evil entity that everyone's terrified of, but then once they start playing, they realize, oh no, they meet people and the people are like, well, the Invincible Overlord is not, we've never seen him, we don't know anything about him, they have local problems. Each NPC they meet is an opportunity for me to kind of convey a point of view. What do people think of the Baron? What do people think of the Invincible Overlord? What do people think of the Dragon Knights? I do not worry about backgrounds. In fact, I am strongly opposed to them. On more than one video game project I've worked on, artists, people have come to me and asked me for long, extensive backgrounds. I don't know why. They literally ask for stuff like, what is this character's blood type? But for whatever reason, people want extensive backstories, and I find that to be a huge red herring. You know, there's a great Q&A with Aaron Sorkin on Reddit. Aaron Sorkin, I think one of the great writers of the last 25 years. And he explained, he's like, look, a character is born when they walk on stage and they die once they walk off stage. They have no background before that. They have no existence after that. Now, that is an extreme viewpoint, but this is very useful when running. I think a lot of people feel this pressure as DMs that they need to know the history of these characters. No, that's not true. What they do need to know, what is useful, is what is this character's motivation and what is their personality. Now, both of these things can be informed by their backstory, but in my experience, that just comes out naturally as you play them. It's not something you have to have worked out ahead of time. So do not feel like you have to sit down with every NPC and write out this long backstory. That's ridiculous. Motivation and personality. What does this character want? And then how do they express themselves? You know, when they meet a guard, what does a guard want? A guard wants to make it home that day alive and meet his family. He doesn't want to have to arrest anyone. He doesn't want to have to get in a fight. He doesn't want to have to use his weapon. And that makes him suspicious when the adventurers show up. He's like, oh Christ, not these guys. Because adventurers are often bristling with weapons and they look different than normal people, and so they're there to make the guard's life difficult. A town guard is going to often be suspicious of adventurers and consider them this incredible annoyance. You know, what does the innkeep want? The innkeep wants to provide for his family. The innkeep wants to serve food. The innkeep wants to make some money. It doesn't take a lot of work or even really a lot of thought to figure out what does this NPC want. Then the only question is, what is their personality? You know what they want. Now, how do they express themselves? You know, peasants tend to express themselves simply and directly. Bards tend to be flamboyant. Noblemen tend to use a lot of flowery language. They've been educated. There are a million different kinds of mannerisms for you to choose from. And I think less is more. Pull it back. You don't have to be flamboyant. You don't need to be memorable. You're just trying to sell the idea that this is a real person. And the real people you and I both know are typically not incredible flamboyant personalities. I mean, I think I have a reputation for being a really high energy. This is the me for the video. The me in real life is not like this. This is my YouTube personality. A mannerism can be something simple like he picks his teeth while he talks. A mannerism can be something simple like he doesn't look you in the eye. Why doesn't this character look you in the eye? Is it because they are suspicious? Is it because they're afraid of you? Maybe it's just because that's how they are. So motivation, personality, what does this NPC want? And then how do they express themselves? I think the number one question I ask myself when I'm running an NPC is, how does this NPC perceive the heroes? If heroes occupy this weird class where they're not exactly noblemen, but they're also better than peasants, where does this NPC fit in this? Is this NPC a peasant? Is he a normal townsperson? And do they look up to the heroes? And looking up to them, does that mean that they're afraid of them, that they admire them? Or do they consider the heroes unequal? Are they another adventurer, or maybe a member of the Thieves Guild? Or are they a nobleman looking down on the heroes? That has a lot to do with how I run an NPC. I think about how do they perceive the heroes, because I think that's the most important thing, is showing the players themselves. And then I worry about stuff like, what does this character know? Obviously, I know everything there is to know about this campaign setting, but the NPC doesn't. So we talked about this in the information video, I often make sure there is a very poor signal to noise ratio. The NPC might have a lot to say, but does that mean that they're right? Does that mean they can be trusted? A farmer knows a lot about farming and he knows a lot about the local town, but he doesn't know a lot about much else. And if you're talking about farmers or peasants or local townspeople, it's reasonable to assume that they might be really superstitious and they believe that the local forest is haunted. Does that mean it is haunted? Well, that's up to you, but maybe not. Because the DM knows everything, because the DM is the ultimate authority at the table, there's an overwhelming tendency for the players to just accept everything your NPCs say as the gospel, because it's coming from the DM. So I often make sure my NPCs say things that the players immediately go, oh, wait a minute. Of course this guy thinks this, because of course he thinks the forest is haunted. He's a peasant. Of course he thinks that demons abducted the blacksmith's daughter, because he's never seen a goblin before. If they meet a dwarf NPC, the dwarf advises violence, because dwarves in my setting are like short Klingons. They're honor obsessed, they love alcohol, and they love fighting. I've had many instances where dwarf NPC advised just a frontal assault on whatever the problem was, and the players go, whoa, is that possible? Are we gonna win? And the dwarf's like, win? Who cares if we win? At which point the players are like, okay, we can't listen to this guy. I know we've talked about this before. So that's how I view NPC creation. I don't worry about backstory. I don't worry really about accents or voices. I do concentrate a little bit on mannerisms. I worry about their motivation. What does this NPC want? And I worry about their personality. How do they express themselves? And then I think about what is their station? What place does this NPC occupy in the world? Are they a peasant? Are they a nobleman? Then I think about how does this NPC view the heroes? Because that's, I think, the best thing an NPC can do is show the players themselves. Show them a point point of view. Each NPC is going to have a different point of view toward the characters. I'll give you some examples. We're going to talk about 3 different NPCs that I've used recently. The first is Lord Edmund Bedegar. Lord Edmund Bedegar is a 13-year-old nobleman. The players thought the family Bedegar had been dead, murdered by orcs, but the orcs kept one of the family alive in case they needed to use him for bargaining purposes. So when I created Lord Edmund, I thought about 2 things. I thought about what is his motivation? What is his personality? One, his motivation is to do his duty. He's a nobleman. He's going to find out when he talks to the heroes that his entire family is dead, that he is the last member of the family Bedegar, and also that he is the Baron. A minute ago, he was a 13-year-old kid held captive by the orcs, but now not only is he free, he realizes, I'm the Baron. So that's his motivation. His motivation is to do his duty. What's his personality? Well, he's a nobleman, so he's going to be very haughty, imperious. Not because he's trying to be off-putting, because that's how he was raised. I think he was the first legitimate nobleman my players had met, and so it was important to me to make sure that they understood that this is a feudal society, and there is a proper way to treat noblemen here. Everything else about Lord Edmund fell out of those 2 things. 1, his motivation, do my duty. 2, his personality, very haughty and noble. Maybe the most important element of his personality came out during play. It's not something I had written down or anything. It was the fact that I realized as I was playing him that he's a 13-year-old kid, but at the same time, he's the Baron, and he is aware of that. Making your NPCs self-aware, aware of how they are perceived is a big deal. He knows I'm just a kid, but he also knows I'm the Baron. So it was important to Lord Edmund that other people treat him like the Baron. That was a problem he needed to solve immediately. If they just treated him like a 13-year-old kid, then they wouldn't give him the respect that he needed as a nobleman, and the existence of noblemen is largely just a shared illusion. There's no physical quality that makes a nobleman different than a peasant. So when he dealt with the PCs, he demanded they treat him like a nobleman, and they didn't like that, by the way. They very quickly got sick of this kid. He confronted them several times, he made it an issue, and in each case, they backed off. When he said, "You will address me as my lord or sire," Graves, played by my friend Phil, was like, all right. Phil said several times, I'm really starting to hate this kid. But he did it. This created a lot of interesting tension. It was the first opportunity for the players to decide, where do we stand on the whole feudalism thing? Whose side are we on? When Lord Edmund said, "You will refer to me as sire or my lord," he didn't do it in an accent. He didn't do it with any kind of crazy mannerism. He just acted like a nobleman. And it put a crisis in front of the players. Would they do that? It forced them to think about, how do we feel about this? How do we feel not just about this kid, but the idea of there being a Baron of Bedegar? Do we care who's in charge? Well, it turned out they did, because their enemy was Lord Saxton, the usurper. So even though they didn't like this kid, he was the legitimate heir. It was useful for them to keep him alive. That moment where Edmund said, "You will refer to me as sire or my lord," became a kind of microcosm for the entire idea of feudalism. The idea of chaos versus law. Where are the players going to fall on that spectrum? And the fact that Lord Edmund's attitude was kind of annoying, this imperious 13-year-old kid got on their nerves because of the way he insisted they treat him. It made it so that it was a real test. It would have been easy for them to just lock him back up again, and they talked about that. That's one of the things I enjoy doing with NPCs, is testing the player's beliefs. Sure, the paladin wants to do the right thing, but it's kind of hard to do the right thing when the NPC who needs help is being a huge asshole. Helping somebody who is sympathetic is easy. Helping somebody who is not sympathetic is a little bit more difficult. And that's dramatic. Having conceded to Lord Edmund's request and treated him like a nobleman, which he had insisted on them doing, later on he returned the favor and made Nicodemus the Count of Rend. That's the reason Nicodemus is the Count of Rend, if you missed that episode. And at that moment, nothing about Lord Edmund had changed. He was still the imperious, haughty 13-year-old kid, but at that moment, they really liked this character because everything he had done had been consistent. Making Nicodemus the Count of Rend had been a noble activity, just as insisting on being called sire or my lord was. Another NPC I enjoyed running was Edric. I think you got to see me run Edric in the stream with Gertz playing Vorkus. Now, Edric's job was to support Vorkus. He was an NPC in Vorkus's party. Edric was a cleric. I created him because Gertz was playing by himself, and in case he got in over his head, I wanted to make sure that he had some help. So of course, the best support character is a cleric. But I never wanted Edric to feel like an equal. Edric was always somebody who looked up to Vorkus. Edric was a peasant. Edric was a cleric, but he was just one of the guys at the church that, lit candles and stuff like that. He was never a hero. He was never an adventurer. He's very pious. He knows some things. He knows a lot about the church, but he doesn't know anything about the wide world. He was always deferring to Gertz. He was always deferring to Vorkus. There were several points in the adventure where Gertz turned to me as Edric and tried to get me to give him some clues as to what he should do, but I never did. I would give him several options, but some of them would be crazy. That forced Gertz to lead. I got the sense that Gertz wanted to collaborate, but I'm the DM. Don't collaborate with me. Lead, be a leader, be a hero. And with Edric in tow, it was kind of easy for Vorkus to be leader. I know Edric's motivation, which is survive, follow Vorkus, but now I need to know his mannerism. I know what he would say. Now I need to know how he would say it. I gave Edric, and I kind of at the time thought of this as kind of cheating, I gave Edric one mannerism, and that is I gave him a stammer. I watched a lot of Claudius when I was a kid. Derek Jacobi playing Claudius had a stammer, so I just ripped that off. You know, Derek Jacobi, the actor, did a lot of work and studied people that had a stammer so it wouldn't be comedic, it wouldn't be disrespectful, and I just stole it. Giving him a stammer, giving this one kind of flamboyant mannerism, unlocked all this other stuff about his personality that I didn't know until I was playing him. He would be self-conscious of his stammer. He would have issues with self-confidence. He was constantly saying to Vorkus, I'm useless. It was up to Vorkus to give him encouragement to say, we're going to make it, you're going to be okay. And for Gertz, that made playing Vorkus feel like playing a hero. All that just from the stammer. And I didn't worry about the self-confidence and the self-loathing about that character until I was playing him. He was born once I started playing him, and then when I stopped, he died. These were things I discovered as I was playing him based solely on the idea that he wanted to serve Vorkus, he was a follower, he wanted to get out of here alive, and he had a stammer. My last example, and we're pretty close to the end of this video, is a normal everyday peasant, a farmer, that the Revenant Vow met on their first adventure. The players were first level and the adventure was against the cult of the reptile god. We should probably do a series on the adventures that I have run and that I liked, because if I tell you what I learned from running that adventure, then you can run it and I will have saved you some time. For my money, Against the Cult of the Reptile God is maybe the best starting adventure, and it's all about this cult that has taken over a town. When the players come to the town in Against the Cult of the Reptile God, they meet three kinds of NPCs. First, they meet normal everyday NPCs who just feel like our town is cursed and a lot of the people that I knew and grew up with are acting strange. Second, they meet some of those people who are acting strange. They're under the effect of a domination spell. Third, they meet some of the bad guys in charge of this cult, the ones who are putting the other NPCs under the domination spell. But early on, the players don't know this yet. The first NPC the players met was a farmer. They knew there was something going on in the town, and they kind of used this farmer as a case study. Patient zero. What's going on here in this town? Let's talk to this farmer. So I thought about, who is this guy? He's a farmer. He wants to provide for his family. That's his goal. That's what makes him toil all day in the sun. And then I thought about, how is he going to express himself? What is his personality? Well, that came from the way the PCs reacted. I just made sure that this guy was incredibly deferential. He wouldn't look the heroes in the eye. If they asked questions, he answered simply and didn't say any more than he had to. Because this guy has met adventurers before and he knows their trouble and he knows that the best thing to do is just leave them alone. He thinks of adventurers as being above him. He's stuck here on a farm. They can go travel the world. Yeah, they're going to risk their lives doing crazy stuff, but they're going to make a lot of money doing it. So from his point of view, they're not noblemen, but they are of a higher station than he is. And anytime a peasant like him is interacting with them, the best thing to do is just get out of there alive. Say as little as possible and try to make it out of the encounter alive. That actually proved a little bit difficult because when he wasn't immediately forthcoming and open and just answer every question the heroes had, they started to kind of get angry at him. He was so deferential and monosyllabic that the players started to think maybe he is one of these dominated NPCs. One of the players actually tried to provoke this farmer. He would push him around, flick his ear. He dug up his vegetable garden. And the funny thing about that was, the more aggressive this PC, this player character was, the more convinced this farmer was that his beliefs regarding adventurers were right. They are terrible people, just leave them alone. After the aggressive PC was done bullying this farmer, the other players made him feel bad. So the PC said, well, no hard feelings, and threw this farmer a gold piece. And the farmer literally does not react, so the gold piece just falls in the dirt. That was the farmer's incredibly passive-aggressive way of telling the heroes to go screw. I don't want your money. Once again, I had created a dramatic situation. I didn't really do it on purpose. I just thought about, what is this character's motivation and how does he express himself? And at the end of that process, we got to a point where one of the characters was bullying this guy, and then as a kind of half-assed apology, throws him a gold piece. Well, that's exactly the kind of behavior that makes NPCs like this farmer hate adventurers, because all they think about is gold. The gold piece itself became this kind of symbol for the relationship between adventurers and peasants. And after that adventure, that night, I actually wrote up a whole scene, I'll include it in the doobly-doo, covering what this farmer did immediately after encountering the heroes. And I used it as an example to illustrate how bad things had gotten in the town. A lot of people were leaving the town, which is what the cultists wanted. And that proved to be a very effective way to show the players how they were perceived and kind of motivate them to be better characters. Because after I wrote that thing, they felt really bad for this farmer. Now, in each instance, I don't think any of those NPCs I just talked about were particularly flamboyant characters, but they each provided memorable moments in the campaign. Because I focused on the character's motivation rather than some outrageous accent, it grounded these characters and it made the world feel more real, and it gave the players a lot of perspective on how they were perceived and how the world works. Hopefully some of this advice is useful, but it's the advice I've got. So if you have any questions, please come by the comments and let me know. Maybe we'll do another video later, NPCs part 2. I've had a couple people online, complain isn't the right word, but bring up the fact that we do fewer running the game videos now, and we do campaign diaries more, and I talk about movies every once in a while. I just want to let everybody know that like the campaign diaries, a lot of people like the campaign diaries. I think there's a lot of great DM advice in them. And because we play every week and people are kind of engaged with the story, I feel like I have to do those. Those are the minimum. Campaign diaries I don't want to get behind on. And I don't want to skip any because then people who are watching will be like, well, wait, what happened? My goal is absolutely to continue doing running the game videos, but the campaign diaries are kind of the first video I have to make each week is how did D&D go that week? And then sometimes I'm struck by an idea, like I did that video on 2001 that a lot of people really liked, but I know some people, that's not what they come here for. That's why I put all these videos in different playlists, and I believe you can subscribe to the playlist you want. Otherwise, the channel is called Matthew Colville. It's not called How to Be a Better DM. So you come here, you get the kind of stuff I'm interested in. I've had a couple of people actually following my campaign diaries start doing their own campaign diaries, and I thought they were really cool. I linked to both of them in the doobly-doo. I hope people do more. I think the campaign diary on YouTube is a great way to memorialize your game. Plus, who knows, people might really engage with the story that's happening at your table. That's it for the NPC video, folks. I hope there was some useful advice in there. As usual, there are no ads in front of my D&D content. I do not have a Patreon. If you want to help support the channel, I encourage you to come by my author page on Amazon. There's a link in the doobly-doo. I am an independent fantasy author. That means I write fantasy novels and I sell them direct to you. I am philosophically opposed to middlemen. It's one of the reasons I love YouTube. I don't advertise my books in the movie stuff I do, so you will see ads in front of those. Hopefully it's not too annoying. Until next time, peace out.